You're not sure how you feel about that?
That was perfect.
Hey everybody, so I've been getting a lot of requests for a Night King video about his grand plans, where he's headed next, what his ultimate goal is. So this is just going to be a little bit about where he's headed next and where he's taking the army of the undead and what he's going to do about the rest of the world. Because even though I think the series is going to end in a very specific way, he's just not some bad guy who's coming for the main heroes and that's going to be it. He actually has a much larger plan. He actually can speak, even though I don't think that they're ever going to do that on the TV show. I think they just taken the silent route and just chosen to make him a little more terrifying that way, but I'll try to explain what's going on. So if you're finding me for the first time, be sure to subscribe to get everything. We're doing Game of Thrones till season 8 gets here, and there's giveaway stuff I'll explain at the end of the video. But if you guys didn't see, Neil deGrasse Tyson actually just posed a really interesting theory about the dragon fire that Viserion is breathing now. He said, scientifically speaking, blue flame, because it's blue, burns much hotter than red fire that the normal dragons breathe, which would actually explain how he's able to bring the wall down, even though I know there are a lot of questions about the whole logic of the situation, the holes in the wings, but I think the real explainer for that is that he's being held aloft by magic. So the fact that he can still breathe fire, even though his fire sacs, like where the fire's generated in his belly, those were pierced by the Night King's spear, he can still breathe fire because of the Night King's magic. So I know there's a lot of confusion about how much power he has, what he's able to do, his full scope of abilities, as well as Bran's is sort of the counterpoint to that. Because even though Jon Snow, Daenerys have the dragons, the real idea here is that Bran sort of descends from the children of the forest in the way that the Three-Eyed Raven did, gave him his powers. It is now sort of the antithesis of the Night King, even though the show has only told us that he just has the sum total of all knowledge of history. So if you haven't seen my previous videos, I basically explain that because the Night King was created through dark magic that the children of the forest use, his abilities and his powers are a function of their abilities. So it's the same thing with Bran. It's just that he doesn't know how to use any of that, and the TV show is probably going to opt to use him in a slightly different way. But as we start to trace the Army of the Dead's path as they head south towards Winterfell and then further south, the ultimate goal of the Night King, at least in Westeros, is the ace card that he's trying to take away from Bran and anybody else that would oppose him. Basically everybody that's living. What is that ace card? Well, really, it's the Isle of Faces in the God's Eye, so I'll talk about the Macumber theory, but the Hammer of Waters is the most powerful weapon next to the Night King that the Children of the Forest were able to use during ancient times. You may have heard a little about the hammer when people talk about the shattering of the Arm of Dorne.
Calling on dark magic, the children raised the sea and shattered the land bridge that the first men had crossed into Dorne. When that failed, the children brought down the Hammer of Waters upon the neck, flooding and transforming it into the bog it is today.
So in the Age of Heroes, what happens is the first men migrated from Essos using the Arm of Dorne. Like it was a land bridge, they just walked across in slow numbers. They began to proliferate and started to displace all the previous inhabitants, including the children of the forest, the other creatures, and things came to war. That's when you get to these big stories about their conflict and eventually the rise of the White Walkers. But before that happened, there's this really amazing quote about how they basically got a whole bunch of green seers. So not all children of the forest have green sight. It's incredibly rare, like 1 in 1,000 people is born with green sight. So they got a bunch of them at the Isle of Faces, sacrificed a bunch of first men to the weirwoods, like you see them sacrificing the future Night King here to this weirwood. And that's what helped them invoke the Hammer of Waters, which even though they describe as a physical hammer, is more of a cataclysmic act of nature. Here's how that passage reads. The children of the forest fought back as best they could, but finally, driven by desperation, the little people turned to sorcery and beseeched the green seers to stem the tide of these invaders, and so they did, gathering in the hundreds and calling on their old gods with song and prayer and grisly sacrifice. Like I said, they sacrificed thousands of first men to the weirwoods on the Isle of Faces. And the old gods stirred, giants awoke in the earth, and all of Westeros shook and trembled. Great cracks appeared in the earth, and the hills and mountains collapsed and were swallowed up. And then the seas came rushing in, and the arm of Dorne was broken and shattered by the force of the water. So that's what they mean when they say the Hammer of Waters. So as cool as that sounds, that wasn't the last time they tried to play that card. They continued to lose ground against the First Men, like they'd broken the arm of Dorne, but by that time there were so many First Men in Westeros, it was too late. So they tried to use it again to crack Westeros in half. It didn't work the way they wanted it to, and it wound up creating the boggy area around the neck that the Crannog men inhabit. So eventually they sort of moved in and took over that area, but the Children of the Forest basically tried to crack all of Westeros in half. Think about how crazy that would be. The hammer itself, that destructive act of nature that now Bran is probably capable of calling on, is something that the Night King wants to take away from them, the way he took away one of those dragons. So as has been suspected, he also has a form of green sight. It might not work exactly like Bran's, but I do believe that he was able to see the dragons and enact all these plans so that he could take that away from Daenerys, which sort of explains some of the stupidity in the Magnificent Seven in their mission north of the Wall. The Night King had the chains ready to go, so I know there are a lot of logic questions about that situation. So were he able to fly down to the Isle of Faces, destroy all the weirwoods, that would take away Bran's ability to wash the army of the dead away. Like literally you call upon the Hammer of Waters, you could wash away the army of the dead with a giant tide of water because they can't swim. That was the primary excuse that Euron used when he bailed on them in the finale, even though that wound up being a bit of a lie.
They swim.
No.
Good. I'm taking the Iron Fleet back to the Iron Islands.
But the Isle of Faces just continues to be a really important strategic place next to Winterfell. Winterfell is a literal army strategic place where you have a bunch of troops. The Isle of Faces just remains a much more magically strategic place. So let me know in the comments, how much lore do you think that Samwell is going to be scanning Bran's brain for in between seasons? Now, expecting that there's only 6 episodes, there's probably a lot of mythology that they're going to brush over. Like, you'll just have to assume that a lot of characters have conversations off screen, the same way they did during season 7. Like, you have this big romance playing out between Jon and Daenerys, but you only really see them together in moments like this a handful of times during the course of the season. So I think it's safe to assume, starting with this mythology around Jon Snow's parentage, Rhaegar Targaryen, they've also started to look into other things that can help take down the Night King and the White Walkers. Going a little further south, King's Landing is still a very strategic place. Cersei's going to be marshaling the Golden Company, and even though we have a lot of ideas about what's going to happen to them ultimately, the Night King could choose to do one of two things, because now that he has Viserion, he could actually fly, like even if you don't assume mass transit system of Westeros, he could still fly incredibly fast down to the south, start turning people, and have them march up north simultaneously while his northern army that's just crossed south of the wall heads down south to Winterfell. So you have this two-pronged attack coming from both sides. But even though he does have that dragon now, it doesn't look like he's in any particular rush. He has the White Walkers that are leading the army at a snail's pace. They'll snake their way down south through the last hearth, then through the Carhold, then back around to Winterfell. And I'm not expecting to see them hit Bear Island just because they can't swim. That was a big thing. So it wouldn't make too much sense for them to go over there, but I do think that it's going to take them at least half of the season to get anywhere close to Winterfell. I do think they're going to continue to march incredibly slowly, while the Night King spends most of his time using Viserion to take down the castles. So I do think that we'll get to see them. They'll have to do it with CG and models, but we'll get to see a version of what Aegon did to Harrenhal way back during the War of Conquest. So that was one of the first targets that he hit. Harrenhal had just finished being built. Harrenhal was so proud of himself. It was supposed to be the biggest castle in the realm. Aegon flew right up with his dragons and melted it halfway to the ground. And that's why the stones still look like they've been melted when you see it in the first couple of seasons on the TV show. So I think we'll get to see that happen with the Night King Viserion in some of these northern castles. And what'll happen is there'll be some new Game of Thrones this weekend. The Rick and Morty finale is happening, so just check the top comment that I pin in the comments for announcements. But I'll say congratulations to the latest giveaway winner, Carlos. You win a copy of the Season 7 DVD. Please private message me on the back end of my channel so I can get your contact details. There's a new round in this video. I'll just announce the winner the next time I post Game of Thrones. You can click here to learn all about the awesome stuff they just announced for the Season 8 production. It's crazy. And you can click here to rewatch that Targaryen prequel. Thank you so much for watching. Everybody stay awesome. I'll see you guys tonight.